Before we get going into your Hockey IQ podcast episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Rapid Shot. Rapid Shot is the smart shooting lane. It's like a batting cage for hockey players. Very cool. Tracks your shot in three ways: accuracy, shot speed, and reaction time. Easy to use. Actually, I used it when I played and was growing up. Very easy. Simply scan your phone in, select your settings, and start shooting. You can see your stats on the app and online. You can check them out at rapidshot.com. Great small business. I actually grew up with one of the owner's sons and have played with all the family members by now, just in local pickups here in Ohio. Very cool local business. Awesome product. I love it. I know quite a few NHLers have them in their homes. A lot of D1 programs have it at their rinks. So you have to check this out. Rapidshot.com. Check it out. Rapid Shot, thank you so much for sponsoring our podcast. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring on Kristen Dieffenbach. Absolutely wonderful resource when it comes to coaching. Kristen, I'll let you utilize this time to give us all of the spiel of all the things you're involved, because it's a little bit long and too much for me to rattle off.
Probably in reality, it's too much for me as well, because I'm involved in a lot of things. Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have a conversation today. And my day job is I'm at West Virginia University. I'm the director for the Center of Applied Coaching and Sports Sciences. We have an undergrad, master's, and doc program. The undergrad masters are mostly folks interested in being coaches across a wide range of sports and a large number of contexts from youth all the way through high performance. And then our doctoral students, the large majority of them are interested in the concept of coach education, coach development systems. How do we help support those things? I'm also the current president of the United States Center for Coaching Excellence, which is a national nonprofit that works to support systems of coach education and coach development across sports and contexts, and also works with the people who are in the field doing the work, sort of a professional network of people that are coach educators, coach developers, and we connect with the international community in that space as well, supporting research and practice.
So we couldn't find anyone better to talk coaching and coaching education than you. So from this point on, we'll just skip all of the coaches from our podcast.
No, there's value in what everybody does. My job is to just try to pull from the very best practices and help get people to start to think, how do we connect the great things that we have going on with quality training of athletes to the best practices for preparing and supporting coaches. So there's so many people doing so many great things. We're just trying to connect all the dots.
Well, perfect. You led into our first question here. So how do you and the USCCE change coaching for the better?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, our goal, and this is from the USCCE's perspective, but also my personal and a large number of people around the globe actually working in this field, the concept of professionalizing coaching, not that it is something that everybody has to have a degree in or even advanced training in, but raising that expectation of what does it mean to be a coach and what are the responsibilities of coaching towards the athlete, but also what are the expectations in supporting that person who's doing the work, the coach themselves. So we're professionalizing it so that the coaches get the support and the resources and the respect they're due, regardless of the level, not just the highest level coaches getting the big dollars and the kudos, but at every level. And then also making sure that the people who are coaching have the knowledge and skills they need to best support the athletes they're working with. And what I mean by that is sort of this idea of right age, right stage coaching, knowing that a coach working with athletes who are under 10 are working with a youth population, and the how-to skills and the what-to skills that you need at that level are different than if you're coaching kids at the high school level or at the collegiate level or the master's level or the Olympic level. And so we're starting to think about these systems of coach education, coach development, because we really want our coaches to have passion. Certainly helps if they have a background in sport, not absolutely necessary, but it does help. And then there's a whole lot of knowledge from exercise science, from the art of physical education, the skills of pedagogy or teaching, so many things that can help inform the work they do. So trying to support all that.
Well, you've done some great work with many organizations, but I want to say that USA Hockey is one that you've worked with more than most and is probably on the further cutting edge of sorts when it comes to these, what did you call them? National governing bodies,
Mhm.
NGBs. So maybe give us a little view into USA Hockey, because a lot of people see the ADM, but do they probably don't understand the why it's so powerful and what and how USA Hockey is going about supporting and really being one of the best sports when it comes to helping the coaches be better.
Yeah. I'm going to start in sort of where you were saying just a minute ago about the NGBs and sort of see where I can pull that forward, because I think it's really important for parents to understand that, we have the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the USOPC. And within that, there's roughly 50 or so national governing bodies. Those are the organizations that are tasked with thinking about and growing our different sports systems. Not all of those sports are sports that are played at the Winter or Summer Olympic Games. But there's only one NGB for each sport in the USOPC. So there may be other organizations that provide programming and training within different sports, but the USOPC only recognizes one organization for each sport. And for hockey, that's USA Hockey. And they really are on the cutting edge of a lot of things. USA Hockey has done an amazing job from the top down in recognizing and valuing evidence-informed best practice in how we're doing things. I think the ADM now is about 13 years old, 12 or 13 years old, maybe just a little older than that, where they really embrace this concept of long-term athletic development. And there have always been development models. If you go all the way back into the 50s and 60s, as sport was moving out of sort of we play it to we plan it and we play it, and we're getting into those eras. As we move forward, we've always planned, we've always had strategies, but those early strategies were often just about skills, right? We went from skill A to skill B. We went from basic structure A to basic structure B, and it was all about what was happening on the ice, on the field, on the track. And as we move forward and we started to really think this through, a lot of organizations globally started talking about holistic long-term athlete development, this concept that just like reading or math or anything else, you have basic building block skills that have to be laid in well on which to then build the more advanced abilities and skills, just like we do in school. And so the ADM model begins with that core concept of physical literacy, being able to just move well and have access to a lot of things when you're very young, early stages, fundamental movement skills, and then over time progressing into more complex skills that are associated with higher performance. The other important caveat is that the ADM that USA Hockey has put together is holistic. So it's not just looking at the physical skills, but also the psychological, the emotional, the social needs that are developmentally appropriate across time, knowing that little kids often are very interested in pleasing their parents. As they get older, hopefully we can shift that to an internal, intrinsic pride that helps support and drive. We know that little kids often participate for fun. And for a 5-year-old, fun is giggle, ha ha. If you've ever had the chance to watch the YouTube video about the little kid talking about going to McDonald's later on, right? That's fun. That's exciting for while they're playing, because they get to do these things and it's exciting. Whereas when you get older, what is fun shifts a little bit, and it's fun to feel accomplished or to feel competent. We also know that it's really normal to be driven by the external bling of the experience, but the sustainable long-term, as someone grows and develops, we have to shift that to an internal sense, not just the external, for it to be sustainable. So there's all this stuff that goes into an ADM model that USA Hockey's put together that really speaks to why it's so important that training and development of kids looks different at different stages. And they've done just a real, in fact, USA Hockey's model is probably one of the ones that most of the other ADM or the NGBs are looking to. There are a couple of others, USA Tennis, USA Swimming, US Lacrosse has one, US Soccer's got a model as well. But USA Hockey really is at the center of that conversation, helping in the big picture change of how we do quality development for our kids, not just a few, but all our kids. So it's a very inclusive model of development, not just cherry picking a few kids that appear to be early onset talent, if you will.
Yeah, and obviously I'm probably broader than most amateurs here in my study, but I always hear from other sports and they talk about USA Hockey, and I don't think people that are in USA Hockey or the parents and coaches that are actually doing the work USA Hockey understand how advanced we are compared to a lot of other sports, and how the resources that they provide are excellent. And if I remember correctly, you were part of the conversations around helping implement all of these things. So there's a lot of people in the background, yourself, Ken Martell, etc., that deserve a lot of credit. So I want to give tip of the cap a little bit, as they say, to you. But I want to dig in on something that you mentioned here. It was about kids going from pleasing parents to eventually developing their internal standards and drive and motivation, all of that. And a big piece of that is like helping the athletes become their own best coach. So I'm curious your thoughts around that.
Yeah. And I want to make sure just we're clear one thing, that really the ADM was really Ken Martell and USA Hockey. I'm an outsider from an academic. I teach it. I work on it. And I came in much later, sort of, we collided as I was teaching it and they were doing it. And I was like, oh, let's collaborate. So I was not a part of those early conversations of what they were doing, but my work connected over to what they were doing as it went along. And your question is a really good one. This idea of how do you help kids evolve their skill set? And I think in order for that to happen, we really have to step back and make sure we are recognizing the fact that kids are kids, that kids aren't mini adults. Just because they're playing a game which we have as adults tried to make look as much like the adult game as possible, they are still not really playing the same game, right? We could use a great analogy that you go to the library and you look at the shelves, and the shelves in the little kids section look just the same as the adults. It's books after books after books. But when you pull it off the shelf and open it up, you'll notice that the adult book often has very few pictures, much smaller typeset, is laid out really differently. And then progressively, as you look in the kids section, you go from books that have very short chapters, much more in terms of the way of spacing and pictures along the way. And it's a gradual progression of turning that book into something that's driven by one thing to something that's driven by something else. And so as parents, and I do have a 10-year-old that's involved in sport. We, as the people that are running programs, the coaches that are coaching programs, we have to take a moment and think about, who are these kids? Where are they right now? Where are they developmentally? Not where I want them to be, not where I think they need to be so that the game looks right, but where are they? So that then I can help shape. And just to give you a good example, I coached 10U this past 2 years. And before that, I was working with the younger kids in the mites. And one of the things that you'll see if you ever spend any time around that population is they can have a little bit of a challenging time managing their emotions. They can have a hard time with frustration. They can have a really hard time when things don't seem fair. Oh, that's not fair. And they'll get all caught up in that and they'll get angry, or they'll want to retaliate immediately by turning around and shoving another kid. And that idea of helping somebody learn how to manage their emotions, you can either immediately bench the kid and get angry, and how dare you do that? Or you can be looking at how do you help shape behavior so that the kid learns why it's important and how it's important, as well as the skills. Another really good example, this is something that just happened this past season. You have kids that, especially when they get tired, again, having trouble with emotional regulation because it's age appropriate, and getting really frustrated and then crying. And to see a 8, 9, or 10-year-old, especially a little boy, on the bench crying or in the locker room crying, can really make some parents very uncomfortable. My child's crying in public. What are they crying over? Nothing really happened. It was just a game. It was just this, it was just that. And then get really frustrated with their kid for being emotional. And one of the things that I talk to my athletes about my 10-year-olds or my U10s, and I talked to my parents about was, how do we allow them a window of time and say, all right, you know what? That was really frustrating. I'm going to give you a minute to take a deep breath and try to quiet down a little bit. And then we'll talk about it, or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on what it was. Giving them a chance to feel the emotion because it's real, it's there, it's okay. Allowing them a little bit of time by themselves to work on calming down or quieting down. And often I'll give them hey, I want you just to focus on breathing, or I want you to try this or that, depending on who the kid is. And then giving them permission to feel the emotion, let it go, and get back in the moment. Because ideally, what I want them to be able to do is on the ice, not get distracted by the frustration and stay in the game. When they come off the bench, not to lose their complete cool and be able to ready for the next shift. But more importantly, in regular life, I don't want them to not feel anger or frustration, because they're real emotions, they're important. I want them to be able to help self-regulate and manage, as opposed to be run by or controlled by those emotions, because that's a healthy way to handle emotions, right? Recognize emotion, feel it, and then not let it drive and dictate you. And that's age appropriate development that we can shift through. That's a little more on the extreme side of what you were talking about, but again, take some patience and some focus on the coach's side to recognize that they're there to do more than just make sure the kid can hit the puck and skate down the ice.
Fascinating. And as kids transition from the very youngest of ages, I'm very curious about the middle section, because we obviously very much see the professional athletes. We can kind of grasp the idea of like little kids like fumbling through things, but I'm personally very curious and interested in that middle phase, say age 13 to age 18, where they're going through many physical changes, emotional changes, hormones, that whole situation that occurs. So I'm curious of how we can help these athletes get comfortable within themselves, starting to drive things internally, less about the I did this and more of the like I really enjoy doing this type stuff, and how you approach those processes and how that's much different than maybe the very youngest and the very oldest.
No, I love that. And you really are talking about the hormone years, right? Middle school into high school. And I think it starts by the recognition you just had that middle school and high school are a very tumultuous time. It is a time in which, from a development standpoint, they are physically growing. Certainly, there's a lot going on. And we know, whether we like it or not, emotions mess with us. Hormones mess with our emotions. We can't help it. Kids will, and even adults, anger, frustration, shorter ability to feel like they're in control of themselves, things they don't quite understand. But also there's some stuff going on in that time period, which is really age appropriate, that teenage years are the process of figuring out who you want to be. Kids go through all kinds of exploration with the way they dress and the friends they hang out with and all those types of things. Figuring out how to find your own community outside of your nuclear family, figuring out what your self-identity is and how you want to express that. That's all really age-appropriate development. And oftentimes a coach during this time period, parents are important. And even if kids say they aren't, they still are. But they start looking at some of those other adult role models and people that start to take on a little bit more weight and a little bit more importance. Peer groups and friends take on a little more weight. And that's all very well documented information that's out in the adolescent literature. So I would really strongly encourage anybody who's coaching middle school or high school kids to read some books on adolescent development, to read some things about what boys and girls of those ages are facing nowadays, because the culture in which they're growing up looks slightly different than the one you're growing up in, and certainly very different than the one I grew up in, given that I'm, a good bit older. And if we don't keep in touch with because you don't grow up in a vacuum, right? You grow up in the environment in which you're situated. And the internet age, the access to constant conversations, the constant contact with your family, that changes how you process and how you do things. It changes how we leave home. if we leave home, all those types of things. So if you're really trying to help foster those changes and build the skills, the resiliency, this intrinsic motivation you've been talking about, that internal sense of pride and satisfaction, if we're trying to help build those skills for our athletes, knowing that they're actually critical to high performance, but they're also critical to quality of life as well. They're not just things that, elite people need. They're things that we could all benefit from. If you're trying to shift and change those things, you've got to understand who you're working with. And so adolescent development class is probably one of the things that I think most coaches would benefit from the most when working with those populations and trying to manage the context so they can do the work. And again, if anybody has any opportunity to talk to a middle school teacher or a high school teacher, they'll tell you their content knowledge, history, social studies, English, math, that's almost relatively easy. That's a set lesson of what I know that they learned before, what I know I need to teach them so they can go where they're going next. That's a pretty set pathway, right? We know I can remediate something if the guy before, the gal before didn't teach them X or Y. And I know I have a responsibility to make sure they've learned A, B, and C before they go to the next level. That's easy, the content, right? However, I got to do it within the bubbling cauldron of hormones that is the group of kids that I'm working with. I've got to deal with all of these individual personalities. And so working on your skills as a coach and knowledge of interpersonal relationships with teenagers, knowing they don't have the skills yet for good communication. They don't have the skills yet for good decision-making. They don't have the skills yet for necessarily putting behavior to consequence. Some may not, but it's going to be a sliding scale of, just like some kids will be 5 foot tall, at 10 years old, and other kids won't be 5 foot tall until they get to 13. That other areas of growth are going to be variable depending on what their home life is like, what they've had opportunity to access, and even how their brain is developing, right? Because we know that adolescent brains aren't really done cooking until they're in their mid-20s. And so some of these things that we got to teach, we have to teach and reteach and reteach and reteach and reteach and reteach, especially on the cognitive side. So we're having the patience to do that. So your question is a really good one. If you're going to work with that age population, it's a great opportunity to talk to somebody or read something about teaching adolescents. So much good information out there.
All right. So following that up, shorter question for you, and we've touched on a lot of this, but maybe we can get it very concise and easily translatable and transferable to our listeners here. What do players and parents need to know about good long-term athlete development? So now we've kind of touched on the early ages, the middle ages, a little bit of the older ages, but let's try to boil this down into something that's very easy for people to take away. What do players need to know? What do parents need to know about long-term athlete development?
I think go back to the core root of what long-term athlete development says, right? Just the idea that this is about lifetime engagement to maximize the opportunities at each and every stage of the game, so you can always be the best you can possibly be. So we're not trying to rush it all and do everything right away, which we know with a young kid will put them at risk for burnout, overuse injuries, all kinds of problems that will curtail their future in the sport. We also are trying to make sure that we're not only giving opportunities to kids who appear to be talented at the expense of kids that might just be developing a little more slowly or didn't have as early of an access to things, so that we're being patient, knowing that hockey is a late development sport. Nobody is a pro at 12, right? And so being patient in the process and letting right now happen, that is the right now that is right for this kid. And looking for those opportunities that if that suit where somebody is right now, what they need right now to get better. And that means you've got to really sit down and look at what are those stages of development? What are the things that are going to make sure that somebody's got all those basic pieces? Again, I would just make it just like going back to school. You wouldn't want a kid to jump into reading Shakespeare at 8th grade if they don't have the reading skills and the comprehension skills yet, because they won't get much out of it. But could they be an amazing writer or author or something down the road? Absolutely, if we progress them in a way that supports their development rather than tries to make them fit a model they aren't yet ready for.
I love that. And I feel like that's kind of the internal fight of every coach. Like, how do you create an environment that is suitable, but then also be able to find the environment and the cues to push the kids to own their own development as well? Because we can talk about, as parents, we can do this, that, and the other, or coaches can do this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, the person doing the work has to feel ownership of that if they're going to go long term. Like you said, internal. And I think that's the battle. It's like some kids, maybe they don't want to, or maybe they find the fire late. Like I was someone who didn't really figure it out until I was like in college. And like I was way late on even just like getting the full ownership. So it's like, how do you push the ownership in a proper way? I always find that to be the interesting discussion.
You know, you said something I think really that's interesting to note there too, is that we as the adults involved in the situation, right? We have already completely over adultified, and that's actually a term that's out in the literature. We have over adultified youth sports. We have made it look like pro sports. We have made it function like pro sports. We have put an incredible amount of emphasis on banners and trophies, even at our mites level, right? Because that's how we as adults measure value. That's how our commercial or our consumer culture measures value. When we go and we talk to the kids, and hockey has built quite a bit on some of the great fun research that's been out there by Amanda Visick and others. And we know that that's not why kids participate. That's not the joy that they find in the game. And so this idea that kids need to be super serious in order to be good is one that adults have sort of put out there. And the idea that, and really being mindful as adults, I hear all the time, oh, but he loves it. That's all he wants to do. Yeah. And all my child wants to do is have pizza every night. It's my job as an adult to help temper and balance that, because that temper and balance is going to be what helps make the best long-term choices for growth and development. And so as adults, it's really easy to slip into that, or as coaches, oh my God, we got to win the trophy. We've got to get the championship. This is all about the right now, right here glory. But what do we know about long-term performance development, long-term gains? They aren't quick and shiny. And very, very, very rarely, almost in no sport, and we've looked at this across a couple of sports, you almost never see the kids that are champions at the age of 10, 11, 12 being the people who are champions at 24, 25, 26, right? Because those kids shine really bright, really hot in a field in which the rest of them are still just growing and developing. And they get so much pressure put on them by parents in the system that when other people start to catch up, they get frustrated. They get overuse injuries. They get burned out. They're done. And it's the slow and steady that actually wins the race in the progression of talent. And so allowing kids a system in which they can blossom like you did at a pace that suits their development may actually keep more talent in the pipeline, is what we're finding.
I always find it curious about the Little League World Series, how few of those kids actually make it to the major leagues.
Yeah, that's an incredible amount of work to do as a child, and an incredible amount of emphasis. And keep in mind too, that adult athletes, there are a lot of options in life and a lot of choices. And when you're a child, there's only one or two. And so it's very easy to get very intense and passionate. I often will talk to parents about when their child gets really interested in sport, they'll just start throwing everything at it. All the money, all the time, all the family resources, everything is just, right? We're going to go. And it doesn't leave the child a lot of room to explore and grow their identity beyond being an athlete, what's called an athletic identity. And that can be really hampering, can be really detrimental to mental health and to other things, and can be detrimental to long-term performance. And we do it in a way that we don't do it with other things. Very, very, very rarely do we take the first love that a teenager has and start planning their wedding and doing all those kinds of things, because we know that they're going to go in and out of love with a lot of different things as they go through, right? But when we see a kid take an aptitude for sports, it's all of a sudden like, oh, yes, they're married to this and we're going to throw everything at it and they're going to be a pro. And you're like, but they're 7, they're 10, they're 12, even they're 14. And we don't allow them that wisdom of adulthood, looking back through it, going, this is great, I will support you, but I'm also going to balance you. Because the reality is, when we've done studies, there was a Canadian study, the kids that are started at mites going up through the pro, it's a fraction of a percent between injury, opportunity, interest, so many factors. It's a fraction of a percent. We want to maximize their ability to get there. But if we let them go too overboard, if we go too overboard, we actually become one of the factors that actually can stop them. So it's that balance. That's our job. That's our job as the adults. Create the environment that will best support them surviving the system, the healthiest possible people they can. And if that means they'll be pros, awesome. And if they aren't pros, they're not damaged. We damage a lot of kids through our sport model.
I think you mentioned something I think that's underrated, obviously in sport, but just in life. The idea of having slack. Like, how often do we fill our schedules where we don't have time elsewhere? Like, it gets to the point where I have to tell people, I'm like, you need to slow down because you're getting too busy to be able to think. Like, you're not thinking, you're not understanding the whole picture because you're too busy. So giving that slack allows that time, as you mentioned, to explore and go beyond, add much more color to the picture, to the life, whatever analogy you want to use.
You know, you're talking about it from the perspective of cognition, which I think is huge. But let's pull it over to something that people really understand, which is, or they really think about a lot, which is sport performance. And one of the things we like watching about elite athletes is those that play creatively, those who have those amazing moves and those amazing things. You don't get those things through rote drills in practice. You get them through deliberate play. You get those types of things through the weird trial and errors and the stuff that you do, right? So it's the playing horse in the yard. It's the messing around in the basement with rollerblades on and shooting at the net and just trying all kinds of crazy angles. It's, I don't know how many people have ever seen the Dude Perfect. I was gonna say, if I couldn't remember that, my son would kill me because we watch Dude Perfect far too often. But Dude Perfect is a YouTube group of 5 guys that basically just like to go out and make trick shots. It's that kind of creative play that is unstructured and undriven by adults that allows for the creativity side of sport performance to develop. It's that moment that you're talking about, that space that's just unstructured, that's just joy of movement, that creates creative players, that creates innovative decision makers, that allows for some of these things to happen that we're not going to get when we over adultify and we over structure our practice plans.
Beautiful. So you've talked a lot about research and making sure that we have things that are supporting, and we're not just kind of like flying off the cuff of our shirt or out of the seat of our pants here. Curious about all of the research that you've read through, research that you've done. What are some best coaching practices from that research that you've done and research that you've read?
Well, and it's funny, right, that we love our research. We'll buy the latest stick, we'll buy the latest gear because research is cutting edge and it's awesome. And as soon as we start talking about research informed practices and coaching, people throw up their hands and say, no, I've always done it this way, this is fine. And I would temper the people that hear the word research and go, oh, no, I don't need that, it's not important, to pause for a minute and really think about innovating. Why are we trying to innovate our practices? Because this is all about getting better and doing it better And if we can use information to do that, let's do it. And I think your question about, what's the research out there in coaching, it's contextual, right? There's some great best practices for kids, allowing for deliberate play as well as deliberate practice. Deliberate practice being well-informed, opportunities that aren't just rote drilling, using small-sided, small area games. Much of the evidence which informs our ADM structures and designs is pulling in that evidence-based practice for deliberate practice, but then also that free time and space, encouraging the not over scheduling over year round, too much opportunity that doesn't allow for the breathing room and the growth to happen. When we're looking at higher level kids, middle schools and high schools, looking for opportunities to stay athlete centered in the coaching. Really doing a good assessment? What does the athlete need right now in terms of their training and from me as their teacher or their coach? Really taking a moment to think about, how do I back up and not overcoach? The research shows that when we talk all the time and take I'm the boss, I'm in charge, we tend to create people who will do the things we say, but can't go beyond that and can't get creative. So how do I back up? And how do I find the most meaningful feedback to give instead of all of the feedback to give? And there's some good evidence when we're starting to look at motor skill, motor development, but also building confidence and competence. A lot of good research around how do we build senses of confidence and confidence that really sort of go hand in hand with each other. And then there's some really great research that continues to emerge about the importance of balancing rest and recovery, going harder when we need to go hard, going easier when we need to go easy, so that, the one work translates into the other. There's just a lot of really good information out there that isn't even just about the what of the sport, but the how of teaching. How do I, as a teacher, do a better job of getting across ideas, creating practice situations that allow the athletes to explore and discover something on their own, which is going to last longer, stick harder, and be more creative? And that's really where we start to see research informing innovative practices that are starting to make a difference through ADM, but also in many other sports and areas.
Something I think about often is why the Amazon rainforest is such a basket of wildlife, and why do we still keep finding new things in the rainforest? And when I went down that rabbit hole, a lot of it was because there were forest fires, in very specific pockets. So these forests are all the same, and then a little pocket gets burnt. Obviously the rain puts it out, contains it, and then that new beginnings is where all of these innovations happen and all these things that we've yet to discover. And obviously the rainforest being massive and really hard to get to, that's why we still have that. And how that applies for me is giving the breathing space, the room allows these little pockets, these groups, individual kids be able to find themselves and create their own innovations. For example, I call myself the originator of the fake drop pass, because I do this move where I'm coming up and there's going to be a defensive switch that needs to happen, or they need to stay with their guys and communicate. And I'll drop the puck in my skate and I'll kick it back up, and 90% of the time everyone loses their gourd, goes to the other guy, and I'm getting a straight shot to the net here. So just being able to play around, and I don't know, it just happened one day when I was messing around. I tried it, it worked out. So how do you create those moments to allow for that kind of innovation with our kids and the ownership? I felt total ownership. Oh, check out this thing I just did.
Yep. And that's a brilliant example, right, of that opportunity for creativity. And as rink directors, rink owners, there's stick time, but the problem often with stick time is that it's often full of the older kids, the bigger kids, the stronger kids. And so creating opportunities for different age groups and different things. We actually did something at the local rink. I pushed really hard and got the backing of the local rec center, and we called it Playground. And there were rules. The rules are the only adult influence is for safety. The There are to be no drills or no activities that are looking like drills. If there's a game that starts to happen, it can only happen in a certain portion of the ice. And again, the only thing adults can do is monitor for safety. It's playground rules, the same as playground. And we put as many toys out on the ice as possible. Everything from the bumpers to different size nets to just obstacles. And we encourage them to set up all kinds of stuff. They set up obstacle courses. They chase each other around. They do everything that kids do on a playground. The challenge is in most areas, people don't have access to outside open ice, right? The stories that the old timers like to tell about playing on the pond for hours and hours and hours. Only so many of us live near ponds, and it appears that ponds are getting less and less safe to skate on as weather shifts and all that kind of stuff. And, people don't want their kids just going out by themselves the way they did in the Mighty Ducks. And so creating those spaces, looking for those opportunities to get kids together where the adults are, again, just there for safety, backing up, getting out of the way, letting them play. No, kids look to me all the time and go, well, what should we do? I don't know. I even do that. I coach soccer, and at the start of soccer practice, what do you want us to do? I don't know. There's 2 nets and a ball. I'll come over in about 10 minutes. I'm getting some stuff organized here, right? They'll figure it out. And it's through those plays, without anybody telling them, the kid who dominates the ball, everybody gets mad at. So they pass. Doesn't work when you stand by somebody you never get past to, so they figure it out. So giving kids time to figure it out and play is just absolutely crucial. And when I say kids, I'm still talking about anybody who plays, because somehow we all resort to becoming kids again when we play.
That's the fun part. That's the best part. You get to leave everything, leave the world behind for a little bit, and just have fun.
We joke all the time that, the snack time post game is just a difference in the size and the shape of the juice box that the boys are drinking between the adult league and the mites league.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. So,
I know. I know. 30 years in sport, and I've seen a lot of grown-ups play.
That's fun. I'm curious about, now you said you've been coaching your son, but you also have a consulting practice. Remind me if I'm incorrect here, but it's around cycling.
Yeah. So my first background was track and field, endurance sports, cycling, road, and mountain bike. So I've been coaching, and I do a sport psychology performance consulting. So my background is exercise and sport psychology from a performance perspective, not a clinical perspective. And so, yeah, I've been working there. Coming over and coaching hockey was a relatively new thing, despite having worked with relatively elite cyclists for the better part of 20 years. So yeah, it was a real change to go from, national champions and Olympic athletes to working, despite teaching it, to working with 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 6-year-olds. That was a wow, I've been teaching this for a long time, and I'm still surprised by stuff experience. Humbling.
So I really want to dig into all of that. So if you could maybe give some experiences where it was like an eye-opening experience, or maybe some stories around all of this, because obviously you've been so into it, especially from a clinical standpoint, studying it. But then, as you know, studying it, knowing it is completely different than actually going and applying it. Bridging that gap is often where the surprise is, like the practical tips that the old timers have, that even if you studied it, you wouldn't know until you start trying it.
I should probably have my 10-year-old son here to refute and dispute anything that I say, because he has a lot of opinions about what I do and how I'm doing it, as 10-year-olds do. I think some of the things, despite years of physical education background and stuff, I was shocked by how quickly kids can progress on the ice and pick up skating and move through and really work on their skills if we just give them time and space to do that. That was really, really exciting, and something that I expected to take. I don't think I gave them enough credit when I first started working with the mites and getting out on the ice with the learn to skate, learn to play kids, that they just fell down and got up and went from falling down to getting up to skating circles around me so quickly was a major one that I was really surprised with. Um, I was really surprised 13, 14 years into the national and international conversation around long-term athletic development, how few parents seem to really understand the concepts. They know that on paper, they see it on the website and all that. But at the same time, I was a little surprised. And I think because parents go in and out of the youth sports scene in a matter of 3 to 5 years, it's a relatively quick turnover. And they come in with a gap of anywhere from 5 to 15 years from the last time they saw or were a part of youth sport. And so it tended to be the families that had multiple kids that had a better understanding or had some background in physical education, training or development, teacher development. But that's still something we're working with and trying to help people understand the best practices and the ways to do that. And I was a little surprised by some of the resistance and pushback that, the comments that I would hear quite often were, well, this is competition and that's development, and they're two different things. And really they're not, right? At a young age, the development is the primary objective, and we use competition to further development. And it's not until we get really high up that we switch that. Even when I was coaching national team kids, 18 and under, 20 and under, we're still using competition to further development because our goal was the Olympics or our goal was the international competitions. And that's something that at the youth sport gets lost, right? We're okay with putting the competition first. And I think the other thing that I was really pleasantly surprised with the kids was when we stepped back and started asking them before we told them things, what do you guys see that we need to work on? Or what do you guys, they actually were much more astute and aware of what was going on and where some of the places, what was the next Just Right challenge. As soon as we talk about that, the most motivating challenge is the Just Right challenge, one that doesn't feel too simple and babyish, if you will, or one that doesn't feel too complex and insurmountable. And so this Just Right challenge, right? You put a kid in a room, bunch of puzzles, they'll pick the one they can do. And when we let the kids sort of talk about what they wanted to work on next, they often came up with some really good Just Right challenges, whereas I might have gone too low and one of my other coaches might have gone too high. Doesn't mean they were always right and we did absolutely everything they wanted to do. But when we gave them a voice, their investment got really different. It was pretty awesome to see.
I love that. The Just Right challenge. It's what's right. It's kind of like the Goldilocks complex,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah. And it really is interesting that as a coach trying to figure out, it's hard, right? You got somewhere between 11 and 20 kids on the ice. It's not going to be a Just Right challenge for everybody. So going into every practice with sort of a shrink stretch model of grouping the kids, changing the activities, being able to move stuff so that my kids who had a little more complex skill set, I could give them a little more of a challenge, but I could dial it back. And that being something that the kids embraced really well, especially when we set it up so that it wasn't, oh, you're the A's and you're the B's. But we always focused it around, what's the thing that's going to be most exciting to you that makes them feel the most confident and competent, that they're getting better. Because if they feel like they can't keep up, they shut down. And if they're bored, they squirrel out on you, which is a really dangerous thing when kids have sticks and pucks and can skate faster than you. So managing their behavior and keeping them focused by making sure we could adjust those things. Again, it was something I had read on paper. It took quite a lot of thought and a lot more time to really get a handle on, especially early in the season, than I expected. But became some great conversations among the assistant coaches and among even some of the kids to find those places. And then we became much more of a collaborative unit in growing, as opposed to where the boss is, you're the worker bees.
I love that. And we've been going for so long, and I feel like we just scratched the surface. So I want to thank you for your time here. But let me just maybe do some takeaways that I really enjoyed, and then you let me know what else I should be taking home after our conversation today. So we talked about internal is sustainable, finding ways to help kids drive their narrative internally, controlling their emotions, for example, would be big on that, or through those teenage years, helping with that self-identity and how they want to express it. So that would be, I think, number one for me. With this, also would come along with like coaching, allowing our players more time, more slack, that not everything's boom, boom, boom. Rather asking them questions, giving them free time and space to really explore themselves, their game, etc., whatever that may be. I think that would be number two for me. And then I think the next big one would just be like finding the next right challenge, letting the game teach a little bit, using these ADM and USA Hockey best practices that they're seeing not just in the US inside of the Olympic Committee, but also when I talk to coaches over in Finland and Canada, that they're even stealing from. So um, taking those little details and really tuning into what's being provided, because Ken Martell and you and others who have done such a nice job at helping develop and push all this great content. So that would be massive, and truly understanding the long term athlete development, how hockey's a late development sport. So those are my three big takeaways. What else should I be taking away from our conversation today?
Well, this one probably is a bit of a, doesn't need to be said out loud just because for you, because I know you and I have talked about this, and I know that's how we ended up here today in the first place, to have this conversation. But for all of the parents and the coaches out there, I would encourage you, as you're approaching, how do I best help my athletes grow and develop? Pause for a minute and turn the lens on yourself. How do I be the best sport parent? How do I grow my skills as a sport parent? And how do I be the best sport coach for the context in which I'm coaching? Whether that be really little kids, elementary, middle school, high school kids. How do I help with the context that I am working with? And how do I help become the best sport parent or the best sport coach by investing the same amount of time and the resources into looking at those best practices, not just what we expect our athletes to do, because we're the shepherds, we're the guy, we're the folks in charge. We're the ones creating, cultivating those environments, choosing those environments, making sure they are the best environments, the same way that we go to the grocery store and pick out the best food. And so USA Hockey has tons of fantastic resources, not just about the kids, but how we sport parent, about how we sport coach. There's many other resources out there. John O'Sullivan, just to give a shout out to his Changing the Game project, amazing resource and materials there. And there's so many others. Project Play's got great information. It's a national think tank group. The Department of Health and Human Services with the National Youth Sports Strategy. There's a lot of great resources. Don't just look at what the kids have to do. Look at how you, as the adult, get better at leading in that space. That would be the biggest thing I'd put on them, which is the whole point of your podcast, I think, which is amazing.
Absolutely. It's all about getting better. How can we think smarter and do things better tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
So, really excited to finally be able to connect. I know it's been a long time coming, and hope to have you in Columbus here shortly, coming back, making a few more trips, and hopefully we can get together and get some coffee. But thank you so much for taking the time here today.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the work and helping people think about this in a different way. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.